Oh,
Okay. All right. So then we'll talk about resources for understanding racism, and then just open it up for conversation. So just some definitions here. You guys are pretty familiar, probably, if you know about historical trauma, about Maria Yellow Horse Braveheart. So the way she describes it is a cumulative emotional and psychological wounding over one's lifetime, but also generations. So really what it's about, thinking about where our ancestors have come from and how our ancestors have suffered. And it's not just, a lot of times we think of historical trauma as like Native people suffering over loss of land and loss of language and culture, but it's also, you know, white people also have historical trauma. So you might not know about it, but you know, related to, you know, different wars and things like that. And also for those of us who, you know, have had, you know, maybe coming from communities where there was a lot of racism and unrest. So, and I come from Red Lake, which, you know, if for those of you who are not from the area, Bemidji area and some of the northern cities are very racist. So that can be really challenging for anybody who resides in those types of communities. Oops. And I'm having a hard time moving things around here, so just bear with me. And then also historical trauma is really thinking about the experience of a traumatic event, and then it's usually collective. So a group of people experiencing it together, and then also multiple generations of experiencing it. And it might look different from generation to generation and experience different from generation to generation, but that it's a theme. And microaggressions, this term has been around for quite a while, but essentially it is the feeling of or experience of discrimination due to being targeted either subconsciously or consciously because of your race or ethnic group. So an example of that might be people commenting on you know, so if you're a jingle dress dancer, for example, you know, somebody asking you to wear your outfit or your native clothing to present or something like that might be something that could be a microaggression. Does anybody else have an example of one? Sorry, my cat keeps trying to get into the screen here, so I'll probably just let her. You guys can all say hi to Mallory Moonstone. She's a kitty yet. She's trying to climb over me. So, and then legacies that are passed on unconsciously. So a lot of times we can experience, so for example, racism is passed down unconsciously a lot of times in families. You might look back and say, you know, oh, my family was very into social justice. They did not condone racism. However, they didn't have any friends who were people of color, or so it can be really subtle in the ways that people express racism. And of course, this shows up in different ways. So please don't be offended because this is like Minnesota. That's I'm thinking about in particular here. And then also the experience of anxiety and how that shows up from generation to generation between parent and child. Gosh, she's clawing me. Jeez, I'm gonna put her down. And then the way that historical trauma really shows up kind of very, oh, ouch, gosh, she's a little, she has her claws, so she's a little vicious. Is through showing up as health disparities. So that could be mental illness, it could be substance abuse, but basically the fact that some Black and Brown communities struggle with different disparities at greater rates. Oh, cat, seriously. Okay, let me see if I can move this. Oh, there we go. So community, and thinking about modern day historical trauma, community and racial trauma due to experiences of trauma. And what that looks like is, we're all kind of experienced racial trauma, I believe, from what's happened with George Floyd. Just the witnessing of a murder. I didn't watch the video, but just the picture alone was traumatic for me. We know from previous videos and things that have happened that, there's not accountability. We've seen murders happen on being recorded in the past and not have had charges placed. Even when you think like, of course, this person's going to get convicted, and they don't. So there's a lot of distrust and community level anger and grief. With COVID, I think one of the things that showed up for me, and I heard others talking about, was really reminding me of early Native experiences with epidemics and genocide. And, what that looks like today is just the lack of support and PPE that went to Black and Brown communities, and the different stressors that people faced on top of that with losing jobs. Um, and one of the things I saw and heard people talking about as well is white fragility. And there is a book out on that. And I heard that it was sold out, so that's a good sign. So the book is really about, and it does have a lot of repeats from other literature around this, but it's a really good kind of entry level book into it. But essentially it's about how, like, through history, it kind of talks about like white women's tears, and how a lot of times women in the past, and we saw this recently with the thing that happened in Central Park, where a woman didn't want to put her dog on a leash and ended up calling the police and making up a false story, recorded on video. So there's this piece where people subconsciously or consciously don't want to acknowledge their privilege, or they don't feel comfortable doing that. So they may cry, or may kind of act more like a victim in the situation, like it wasn't me, it wasn't, those types of things, and then essentially are let off the hook from having to think about or deal with the situation. And I'll talk a little bit about our roles and responsibilities as well. Any questions about that or comments?
That book's called White Fragility. That's
Yeah.
the title.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good book. And there's a lot of other really good. One of my favorites is, and the movie just came out too, Just Mercy. It's so good. I only watched a part of the movie, but the book is really, really good. And it's about this lawyer who goes down south and tries to fight for justice for all these young people who were falsely convicted. And it just shows a lot of the history of racism that's happened over the years, and how he's able to bring a lot of things to Supreme Court and get cases overturned, and actually change case law over time. So it was really an awesome book. And then Grandmother's Hands is another really good one. I have heard people say that one is really hard for people to read because of the stories and things that are in the book, but I really enjoyed the book and thought it was really good. It's really much more about the African-American experience, but very good. And I was just really impressed with and this is just a few examples of the community demands that were, I guess, listened to, which was the charges for Chavez and the 3 officers, and then also the defunding of police. How impressive that, like, Minneapolis Public Schools is, let go of their contract. University of Minnesota, I think, and there's a number of others. I think the city, or the park board. I don't know if they voted yes or no on that, but I believe they voted yes, which impacts like Phillips neighborhood park, where there tends to be a lot of violence, police violence. And as a therapist at NAC for many, many years, I've heard of just like the most unbelievable like terrorism to the community by the police there. And I'm not saying all police are bad, but I do believe the system doesn't have accountability, and I think that that's the biggest piece that people want to address, why they do want to defund and get rid of police as it is. Any comments about that? Like, I know that that can be kind of a hot topic, maybe not for this group, but I'm curious if anyone has thoughts or comments. Okay.
About what specifically about it?
Oh, just about the defunding of the police.
Oh.
And I know I was reading some of the school board comments, and there was quite a few people who were upset and like fearful about like what that meant for the students and their safety. But I feel like it's such a great opportunity to bring in more mental health resources. There's just such a lack in the school system. Any thoughts?
I think, because I've done like police brutality organizing, anti-police brutality for several years here locally. And I know some of the concerns with like when they're talking about disbanding the police or whatever is would we see a rise of like private security forces emerge that could be kind of problematic in itself too. So that's something to kind of think about.
That is such a good point. I had some interaction with trying to hire private police, or not police, but security at shelters before. And a lot of times they would take advantage of the women, they would try to pimp them out. So it can be really problematic, as you said. So one of the things that I'll talk about here in a bit is just like the success that we've had with some of the community protection. So one of the things I just wanted to kind of highlight some of the strengths and resiliencies that I witnessed, and a lot of you witnessed, and we can add to this if others have thoughts, but just the way the community came together, it was just so awesome to see Black and Brown communities standing together and getting behind each other and supporting each other was beautiful. Cleaning up, offering for food, or offering food and meals to people who've been impacted by the loss of grocery stores and who are just out there cleaning and protesting. I just was really impressed by that. And then protection for each other, that kind of goes to that, James, to that community watch piece. American Indian movement was stationed around a lot of the Native American buildings and was able to protect them. And there were injuries to some of the people who were protecting, but not to the buildings, except for McGizzy, which I heard that wasn't intentional, that they were burning down another building and it caught on fire is what I've heard. I don't know if that's true or not, but I've also been so impressed by apparently they bought that building. McGizzy bought that building. I don't know if you guys were familiar with McGizzy's old building, but they doubled in size basically and they bought this new building for like 800 some thousand, like 2 years ago. So really, or maybe even a year, it's really not been that long ago. And it burnt to the ground. It was really beautiful. And there was a lot of expensive equipment in there, and they had set up a GoFundMe asking for just $10,000, and they've secured, they might be over $1 million now. They were not that long ago, just over, or just under $1 million. So I guess Lizzo, if you guys are familiar with her music, she's from the area and she started out her career there, I guess. She donated, and I guess some other celebrities who are from Minnesota also. So that was really cool and neat to see people come around and help. I saw a funny meme, actually from a person who used to work here at NAC, that said, it said something like Minnesotans are bad enough to burn down the city and good enough to get out and clean it the next day. I was like, oh my God, that is hilarious. And then the connection to culture. I thought that was really neat how that came out, like a lot of the arts and traditions. There was jingle dress dancing, drumming and singing. People decorate, or like the different murals that popped up. I did hear that there was some controversy over the George Floyd beautiful memorial that is set up, that apparently it was from a group of white people who hadn't asked, I guess. And I guess there's some controversy over that, but hopefully that can be set aside, because I just think it's beautiful and helping people.
It was one white person and 2 Latinx artists.
Do you know anything about it? Like why there's the people are so upset?
I think that because there was no Black voice. So the white woman, I used to work with her, we're close friends. And they just like put it up really quickly and didn't like consult with like the Black community before putting it up. And I think that that's, she put up a statement on her social media, like apologizing to the Black community, basically, because that was the biggest piece of feedback, was that they didn't include like any Black artists.
Got it. Okay.
So.
And that's Tina talking. Thanks, Tina.
Sorry for interrupting.
Oh no, thank you. That's great, because I don't know a lot about it. I'm just like hearing things. So correct me, anybody who, if there's something I'm saying that's not totally right, or if you have another perspective, please do. But I mean, I think that does raise a good point about how, and that's another historical trauma that communities face. I think about when the artist who wasn't from Minnesota came in and did the Dakota 38 memorial at Walker Art. It was so traumatic for me. I don't know like other people's experience. I hear that it was similar, but like I got knocked off my feet by it. It was so traumatic because we don't talk about that. It's not even talked about in history classes. And I don't know if people are familiar with that, but it's the largest hanging or massacre that ever happened. And it was a bunch of Native people who were fighting for their rights and who were hanged unjustly, basically, down in Mankato. So really painful history there. And then also, go ahead. Was someone going to say something?
I do have a question. It wasn't me. I don't know. Was someone else talking?
Go ahead. I thought I heard somebody interject.
I heard that McGeezy, is that how you say it? Am I saying it? McGeezy?
Eagle in Ojibwe.
It means eagle?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. I heard that they lost some historical records and things. Is that true? Do you know?
Well, I heard that they were able to get out actually all their records, and
awesome.
Because it's one of the longest standing agencies in the area. They have a lot of film and history there, but they actually went in the day before and removed everything. So it was unreal, really exciting that was able to happen. Because that's horrible.
Actually, on Minnesota Public Radio, they said that they lost stuff. So if that's wrong, it's being broadcast pretty far. That's a shame.
They did lose a lot of stuff, but it was mostly technical things, a lot of their equipment, and which is a huge expense. So they lost a lot of valuables, but I don't know about as far as I know, I heard that they went in and removed everything before that happened. But did they say they lost records and things?
They were talking about some recordings of M. Scott Momaday.
Oh, okay. maybe, I can't hear you, Reka.
They had a really beautiful hour-long reading of his on the radio last week.
Okay.
And they said, yeah, they were saying that some things were lost, but I don't,
Yeah, wow. Okay, well, I will definitely, you said NPR or NPR?
Minnesota Public Radio. It was one of their morning shows, like the 9 a.m. show, maybe that Carrie Miller. I don't know.
Okay.
But if you Google it, I'm sure on their website.
Great. Thank you. Was there somebody else who had something they wanted to say? Okay. And then just the way the elders were protected, but also led a lot and provided a lot of voice was really phenomenal as well. Does anyone want to add any strengths or resiliency that they saw in the community that isn't listed here? And then I wanted to kind of highlight, I talked briefly about this, but the school to prison pipeline, people probably have heard about this before, but essentially it's the idea that because there's police in a lot of the school systems, those early interaction with police and early records really set people up for a kind of a history, or basically getting a record and getting into more trouble, basically. But you can see here some of the statistics that 1.7 million students that experience cops in schools don't have counselors there. And you can kind of go down, no nurse, no psychologist or social workers, but they have police. So that's one of the really impressive pieces. I mean, there's, I don't know if Rachel or Hannah or Josette are on here. I don't see them, but essentially they're, I mean, what I hear at Center anyways, Center School, they're a school that is really close to us, not even a mile away, and they have a therapeutic classroom. And if you know that population, it's a lot of runaway youth, and they have a classroom style where it's really informal, and they work at their own pace, and it's just really amazing because these are the kids that have probably experienced the most trauma too, because their parents have been using, or they're in the system, they're runaways. So it's just really beautiful that they're doing that. And some of you may be familiar with kind of how implicit bias works and discipline in schools, essentially because there's this idea of like implicit inherent good or bad in people based on race. Certain, the Black and brown communities tend to get targeted, and because teachers will have fear responses, and then based on their belief systems, and then call the police. And then because there's not strong policies that protect Black and brown people, a lot of times it's up to teachers and officials, school officials, to make those decisions. And it ends up where a lot of students end up getting records early on, and having disciplinary actions that impact their ability to stay in school or their desire to stay in school. So that's kind of where that disproportionate racial impact for education kind of comes into play. And imagine wanting to be in a school where, you were treated like you didn't matter, or you were believed to be a problem. So that's kind of what our kids are up against. Any comments about the school? And just to also, NAC is planning to expand. Dr. Stately and I just had a conversation with Minneapolis Public Schools, Sanders, and basically we're going to be beefing up our presence in South. Right now we have like not even a full day there, but the desire is to get in and do some prevention work and some billable psychosocial type work. We are doing groups there now. around trauma and cognitive behavioral therapy, but we want to do more kind of informal work with them to kind of help with self-esteem and community building too.
One of the things that I experienced, I worked at a school as a parent volunteer, and we were gathering numbers just regarding punitive disciplinary measures that were taken by the teachers and the school, is how early this starts and how surprising. I mean, kindergartners are being put into, you know, they're being sent home from school and they're in detention, and really, and boys of color in particular, the numbers are really alarming. And it depends upon the school area where you're at. So, you know, I think about that, you know, as a really little person, you're already given the message that something's wrong with you. And how that, I think sometimes what happens is all that sets in with kids at a very, very young age. And then we don't react until later on, where a lot of the, I think preschools and elementaries, like the 3-year-old and 4-year-old programs, aren't addressing their kind of punitive measures they take with the little ones. So hopefully there'll be some change with that. Like you said, I mean, there's far more law enforcement than there is anything else in the schools.
And also just investing in racial equity work for the teachers, and I've had conversations with teachers that would blow your mind, just the lack of education and lack of knowledge about community, and it's frightening actually, but I'm sure not every teacher again, but like we need to do better with the education piece. Go ahead.
What we found with a lot of the teachers was that they kind of had this expectation that it should be delivered to them. Like we were supposed to, the school was supposed to educate them. And, you know, I was coming from a place of just engage in the community, you know, get out in the community and start to interact with people. You know, you don't need to be spoon fed something, but they were just like waiting there, like somebody's got to teach me, you know, and, you know, so this kind of lack of, if somebody doesn't tell me exactly how to interact with somebody, I can't, you know. And I was always just like, well, go, you know, meet the parents and get out in the community.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it is part of our responsibility when we're working with a community to really learn and educate ourselves and bounce things off of people for sure. And we can definitely partner with each other in this. And, you know, but I definitely don't see myself as an educator of people. This is a way to like facilitate a conversation. I'm always happy to talk with people, but, and give resources. But I think you're right. It's really a personal journey that each of us have. So the vulnerability of children, I don't know if not all of us work with children at NAC, so I just wanted to kind of throw out a couple of stats and just so people kind of have a sense of what's kind of going on with our children. So children between the age of 12 and 19 are more likely than their non-native peers to be victims of both either a serious crime or a simple assault. And then Native American children are 17 times more likely to be placed in out-of-home foster care. And then once the kids get into foster care, the chances of them getting out is really low, just because of the implicit bias and the racism that's in that system as well. I mean, it's in all systems, but just kind of wanted to point that out so that people kind of have a sense of how pervasive the problems are for our families. And then the opiate piece I put up here because, you know, we're dealing with an epidemic in that as well. But essentially, you know, that our people are struggling with more legal issues, domestic violence, mental health issues, severe poverty, and then the children are at increased risk then for things like the attention disorder and substance abuse issues and mental health. And just the lack, and then there's an overall lack of culturally specific programming as well in schools. I found this nice, actually, I think a friend of mine shared this and I can't remember who it was, but it's this really nice graphic on, and I can share this PowerPoint too, but it's on each of the different developmental ages and like what, how people start to recognize or talk about race from a very tiny little young age, and just because of that, we need to be more overt and conscious about the way we talk about race, and making sure to correct things. So, for example, I live in South Minneapolis, and my daughter, who's 6, she goes to Bancroft, so she's around all different races. There's actually a really large Native population there, which I was excited to see. There's like 4 Native kids in her class, and she's got, I think they have 4 kindergarten classes at that school. So she's around a lot of kids of color. And one of the things that she said after the murder and everything, we talked about it because she's hearing about it, hearing the sirens, hearing the helicopters go over her house every few minutes. So I was explaining things to her, and she said that she was really afraid for her friend Michael. And she was really like, just, I couldn't believe like the way that she was talking about it, and just the level of understanding she already had in applying it to this young boy. And so I kind of talked about like what she can do to kind of make a difference. And I think when kids, you just meet kids where they're at, if they start to recognize, things like, I think one of the earliest things people do is at age 2, they're already selecting their playmates by race. And I had a couple incidents at school where, with my little girl, where, there were comments made about like, this was out in Stillwater, and there was only a few Native, or only one Native kid, obviously mine. And then I think 2, one African-American and one Indian student. And she just wasn't exposed to as many people out there as I would have liked. But there were already comments out there where she was saying, nobody likes such and such because they have dark skin. So, I think, and that was literally, she was in preschool. I think she was probably 4 years old. So that was a really good time to kind of engage the school and talk about like, how do teachers intervene with that and make sure that they're correcting those types of things, because those are things that they're learning from other students who are older than them or from their families. But I just appreciate when kids do bring that up, and it's such a great opportunity. Does anybody want to make a comment at all about like preventing racism? Okay. So in working through this with our clients or ourselves, just encouraging people to take breaks and check in with yourself. This is very hard topic to talk about. So really just kind of, even now, if you could just kind of do a body scan, thinking about, where you're feeling any tension, any emotions that are coming up. You don't have to share those. If you want to, you can, but essentially it's a way to kind of identify, as we're kind of going through this, is there areas that we can support you more with? Is there someone you can consult with? What resources might you need? And so forth. Any comments about that? Okay. Roles and responsibilities. So with a lot of the racial equity work that we're doing here at NAC, we've started to look at policies and how our direct care or our policies for our staff impact or may have some bias in them, basically. But essentially, as providers and people who are providing direct care, our duty really is to think about, the community and like what is their worldview, and how can we come alongside them and help them with them helping the like partnering. So that's one of the things I really love about NAC, is that the community is such a part of investing in, like, for example, our elder council. We have 2 elders here, and just the work that they're doing to kind of help us also identify policies and practices that may be not helpful. Any questions about this? As far as like our role, so doing that self-education, but also partnering, and doing advocacy work. And some of that is, you know, encouraging clients, providing clients the access they need for reporting, and, you know, coming alongside them in whether they're facing discrimination or a system issue. And I think it's going to take a while, but I think this is really awesome to be seeing how things are happening with the changes that are happening with the police, hopefully, and hopefully it continues, and we can see some big change. Any thoughts about roles and responsibilities as providers or in your role?
I think it's been great to have Deanna Bolio, who I believe is Renee's daughter,
Mhm.
working as a outreach with the police department. I've been able to connect a client of mine who was a crime victim with her to get help. And I mean, I can see that it was a challenge for my client to find the detective directly, and Deanna's been so helpful in getting the message she needed over to the police department.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for mentioning that. And I'm sure she'd be okay with sharing her info if others want that. But essentially what Deanna does is she's an advocate for the community with the police.
Can I say something?
Yeah, Renee. Mm-hmm.
You know, with this talk about defunding the police department and, reassembling it, or I can't remember the exact term that they used. I can't, for me, I'm biased, of course, because she's my daughter. But I think that the roles that they have in the community are really important, and Chief Rondo, has made some strides in getting everything done. So Deanna had a meeting this morning to find out, more of what's going to happen. But I want to find out a way that if people are interested, we can send our thoughts. Like Reka, what you just said might be important for city council or for those decision makers to know, to help our community, because I think there are good cops, and I know, there's American Indian cops on the force too. So it's just, and I asked myself, would I feel this way if my daughter wasn't affiliated with the police? So I'm like, would I even know Chief Rondo and the things that he does, through my daughter, and how fond I am of him. But so it's and I think an overhaul of the police department is needed. So it's for what that's worth. I'll find out some contact information if anybody's interested in and sharing. So,
Miigwech. And then just to kind of piggyback off that, so NAC is doing some work with the city to improve our working relationship with the police. So one of the things that we're going to be doing, hopefully here in the future, whether or not we get the funding, we have applied for some funding to help us with this, but essentially partnering with some of the other healthcare settings in the area that are large, like Hennepin Health, to help kind of navigate when somebody is arrested or somebody is detained for a substance abuse related issue, that rather than going to jail or being arrested for sales or whatever the issue is, that they would be offered actual intervention. So they could come to NAC and receive services, and they can opt into that or not. But it's a really neat opportunity for us, and I'm really hoping that that goes through. But we are also doing some work. We got a large federal grant, a few-year grant to do work with the Office of Victims of Crime, and that work will be, and we've been almost a year into it now, and a lot of that work is really around trying to identify community partners that we can kind of step in these different situations and intervene and provide support. So if somebody overdoses and they're at the hospital, how can we connect with their family and offer support to them, or, offer to support to the individual. And then also the school system, how do we, so it's kind of like a multi-system approach that we're working on. And I'm really excited about it. We've really started to build some awesome partnerships. Any questions about that? Okay. I just love Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, so I always want to give her props. But so in April, she started the Civil Rights Discrimination Reporting Line, Helpline. So if your clients are experiencing something, or you witness something, or even if the client doesn't want to share it, but you want to share something you've seen or heard, you can actually call this discrimination line, and hopefully we'll start to hear about that. And I've also heard that the human rights group is also starting to, not only are they investigating the police right now, they're also working on helping to identify things that are going on in the community, and are wanting tips on that. And if people want that information, I can get that too. I just saw that. So I talked about a few books earlier, but I put some resources in here for talking to children, and then also for adults in better understanding racism. There's some really neat resources here. If you're not a big reader, there is a really cool podcast called white, I'll remember it in a second, but it's basically on like an experience over, it's a podcast that kind of talks about different experiences, and when I was I'm on the community board for children's, and all their social workers went through a process of watching each video and talking and briefing about it. And I was so impressed with the way that they were able to talk about racism at children's and identify it. And it's really impacted how they're actually, I guess, reporting to child protection, because that was one of the biggest issues, is there's such a big disparity. We know that in reporting for Native American and African American children. So the intervention was to kind of identify what patterns were. So for example, like if you identify an incident that you want to report, you actually have to go through a system of questions and report out on that into your system, into children's, and then they were reviewing that. And so they're going through this training, and I will remember that podcast here in a second, but I've just been very impressed by that. And then also tools for resources for employers. Voices for Racial Justice is a local program that they have available, and one that I've looked to a lot for guidance. But if you guys want to check out their website, it's really a lot of good information on there. So discussion. I want to kind of open it up to talk about, you know, what people, we have a little over a half hour, wanting to think through ways that we can support you and what things are coming up for you, either for your clients or in how you're working with clients. And then just, you know, what do you see as your role? Who wants to start? Don't feel like you have to talk, but if people have an experience they want to share, what they're going through, please do, because I think it'll help other people. I don't see anyone waving their hand around. Donna, I can't hear you. Can you unmute yourself?
At NAC, the mothers, you know, during the riots, they were on the TV fixated like 24/7, and their children were watching, and so the children got scared.
Mm-hmm.
So I just encouraged them to break away from the TV and do some nurturing and some calming activities together. And it was like they didn't they responded to that, but they didn't even have a clue that this might be harmful for children to watch. So I was able to, you know, just support them and give them some ideas on, you know, turn off the TV, play with your children, you know, do some calming activities and take them away from that scene, you know. But it surprised me. I thought, you know, young mothers would know that this is harmful. But I didn't, it just surprised me. That's all I wanted to say. And I was glad to give them some feedback on what they should do with their children to help them.
Mm-hmm. Donna, we didn't hear the first part of what you were saying. We heard, the last part we heard was just around, you know, them breaking away, but we heard that they were mothers, but we missed the first part of what you said.
So I've been talking to a few mothers, and I'm guessing they're young mothers at Little Earth. And they were fixated on the TV and the riots. And quite a bit. I mean, that's all they focused on. And so the children were getting afraid, you know, terrified. And so I just encouraged them to break away from the TV and do activities with their children, away from the TV, away from the violent scenes and the unrest, to do some calming activities, to take them outside, play with them. And what happened was, you know, they responded, encouraged, and knew that that was a good thing to do. But I think the mothers have so much on their plate, you know, that they didn't even realize what they were doing, letting their children participate by watching. So, you know, I'll follow up and check with them this week and see what they've done differently to support their children. But I was surprised just that they would allow their children to watch, young children.
I think that's a really good point, Donna. And I think it's something that a lot of times happens with community violence because we're so traumatized or so numb or becoming numb in a situation. It's actually a trauma response for us to not be aware of like the impact or what's going on around us because, you know, they're kind of in survival mode. So that's such a good point. I think it's something for us to really be thoughtful about is how much we're exposing children or how much I mean, we don't realize how much they're overhearing. I mean, I was telling somebody that, you know, on the phone, and my daughter must have been listening, and I was saying that luckily the kids hadn't like really experienced much. They slept right through it, I said. And Eloise was like, well, Mom, I did hear the police sirens and the helicopters. And I was like, whoa, you know, I didn't even, this was when I first started to realize that how much she knew. And that's like, she didn't know in that moment that she should be afraid. But I think, you know, had I had the news on and stuff, she would probably have been horrified. But yeah, her little way of thinking about it and processing was so interesting. And the way she took, what she took away too. She said when I've heard her talking about it to other people, and she said, and she says things like, I feel so sorry for George's family. And, you know, it just, what did she say? She's like, I can't believe the police sat on him. So these are things that she is like overhearing and what she's making sense of things. And it's important because those are, you know, the things that she's just hearing. So it's just being aware that we need to talk to kids and what they're being exposed to. But yeah, absolutely. Other thoughts?
I'm glad.
Go ahead, Renee.
Oh, I was just going to add something, but you alluded to it at the end. Is, you know, I was about 7 or 8 when the riots happened in Minneapolis on Plymouth Avenue, and we live really close to Plymouth Avenue. Well, I'm still in the house, but when I was a kid, but I remember having the window open and peeking out the window and hearing and smelling the smoke and hearing the sirens and all the unrest. And my parents didn't explain it to me. And so I would catch like tidbits on the news, you know, about the social unrest, but I never, they never sat down and explained to me what was happening and why it was happening. So when all of this happened, I triggered that when I was a kid, and it brought me back to that place of being really afraid. And so I think, you know, I think what Donna said is really important, to turn off the TV and sit and talk with your kids and just explain to them what's happening, you know, like what you've been talking about in this video, finding, you know, the right book to read to them, or, you know, just reassuring them, because I think that we carry that trauma, right? You know, here it is 6 years later, you know, not that long, I'm not that old, but I'm still, you know, being triggered by this. But it, you know, it is very distressing what's happening. And I think to have somebody that you can talk to, you know, my grandson was experiencing trauma in his body. He you know, he told me, he goes, oh, Grandma, I just don't feel good. It's my stomach, and I feel like it's in my heart. I feel like I have heartburn. And, you know, so I just sat down with him and did some healing work, and we, you know, did some somatic body work, and, you know, and it really helped. And so I think it's important to pay attention to our bodies and go into those places that are uncomfortable. You know, I really appreciate that exercise that you did earlier. So that's all. Miigwech.
Thank you. And Renee is doing such amazing work with clients. If you don't know about what she does, try to find a time to connect with her, because she does brain spotting. And Renee, do you want to say a little bit about what you do? And I mean, because I think that you kind of talked a little bit about the body work that you do, and I think that would be helpful for people to understand a little bit more about.
I do as little as possible. No, I'm kidding. No, so I do healing work. You know, Ojibwe woman, she's actually my cousin, did atonement. So I have the ability to, you know, I'm just a conduit. So I do hands-on healing. I'm a conduit through the Creator to heal people. It's hands-on or hands-off. And I also do somatic healing. So physical and emotional trauma that we're exposed to from birth settles in the body and in the brain. So I help people get in touch with that, to go inside the body and find out where that trauma is, and then find ways to release that. I also do brain spotting, which was developed by Dr. Grand. He was doing EMDR on a figure skater, and something happened in her eye that made him stop doing the EMDR. I don't know if you would know what it is, but it's a technique that they use for therapy, whether you watch the eye movement. So, it's believed that trauma is stored in our subconscious, thankfully, because if it was stored in our neocortex, it would be a mess. So brain spotting is a technique that I use to locate the trauma and release it. And it's remarkable because it doesn't bring up the emotional impact that we do when we remember it or go there. You know what I mean? So that's about it in a nutshell. And then I do that, I integrate our traditional ways with this work. So it's integrating the social order with our traditional ways of life, so that, because we walk, as Indian people, we walk in two worlds. So how do we do that in a way where it makes sense, and how do we integrate the Western medicine with our traditional medicine so that it makes sense? So that's some of the things that I help clients do. Miigwech.
I guess I want to say, as far as the IOP goes, in terms of support, I'd be open to hear what you guys think. And Donna and Lori are here, so correct me if I'm wrong, but our experience so far since George Floyd's murder has been that some clients want to process what they're going through, and others really want to distance themselves. And you talked about being numb before. Like, I see that happening in group. I feel like it's happening a little more so, that some clients are not interacting at all throughout the group. And I've talked to one or two, and they've confirmed, yeah, they've got really high anxiety right now, and it's all they can do to just be present. So, when this first happened, we just did like kind of a check to see who wanted to talk about it and who didn't. And we offered that we could split the group into 2 rooms if some people wanted to talk and some people didn't. They wanted to stay together and not talk about it. So that's what we did that day. But like going forward, it's been more like people check in on what they want to check in. And some people have chosen to check in on that. And like I said, others seem numb. So I don't know if there's anything we can be doing differently or what we should do.
Thank you. That is such a good point. I've kind of noticed the same thing, that some people are so embedded in it and really being traumatized, honestly, by the amount of exposure they're having to it. And some people are so distant from it that they have all this anxiety, or to your point, they're numb and they just are like disconnected from what's going on. I don't think we want to force people to talk about it. I mean, I don't think it would be harmful to hear other people talking about it, but I do think that maybe going through some exercises of just, high level kind of what are people, what are the different responses people have, because then people can identify like, okay, this is what I'm going through, and maybe this is why, and then they can touch base on it and invite them to touch base in their one-on-one about it. But yeah, I think it's really challenging because our clients don't really necessarily have the knowledge of the different ways in which people are impacted by trauma. As far as like psychological trauma, and thinking about like post-traumatic stress disorder and complex trauma, how people are, when they experience trauma after trauma, and they can't really distinguish between what's what, this is bringing up this, and it really becomes about a different trauma kind of thing, an unresolved trauma. But really, we all have like unresolved trauma. So I think it's even normalizing that because we don't process everything that we go through, and sometimes it's not appropriate to, talk just openly about something. But I think, in the context of a one-on-one therapy, that people should feel comfortable to talk about their actual experiences that they've had in the past. I mean, and how that's playing into what's going on now. Yeah, it could be just it's too overwhelming even to even think about it. People are avoiding maybe or in denial. I've seen some of that too, where people just they are getting angry actually because there's too much conversation about it, and they don't want to face what's actually going on and the how detrimental it is to people. Any thoughts about that, and any other ideas for Reka and how to help clients who are numb or kind of like in a denial space?
I know in working with kids, a lot of anxiety and fear comes from not understanding why they're feeling what they're feeling. So a lot of talking about what is a normal trauma response, and why would people feel more trauma response than other people? Like if you've experienced trauma in the past, you're likely feeling this a lot more than people that haven't. So that education part, and that it's normal, that this is God, the creator, created our bodies to defend ourselves from really scary things, kind of like rabbits and how they freeze. And it's a normal response, and it becomes unhealthy when we feel out of control with it, and when it creates more harm than good. But sometimes it is good. Sometimes it is good to numb yourself. Sometimes it is good to distance yourself, and respecting that your body's helping you figure this out. But helps to get the mind in line with the body, of understanding, why is my body doing this?
Yeah. What about as far as distress tolerance? I think in thinking through what some of the services we provide and like the mind body medicine work that we do, Donna, I'm curious if you want to share any thoughts you have around applying the mind body medicine work to either ourselves as we're going through this and working with clients, or for our clients who are also going through the same things we are.
Well, the education piece, definitely most important, just to understand how the body responds in our autonomic nervous system. But definitely, Dr. Gordon uses our breath, and it's a simple exercise about releasing the endorphins to the whole body, but just to take a pause moment and do some slow, deep breath work so that we have oxygen to the frontal cortex so we can make a good decision. But there are definite exercises that we use in the mind and body work to help people with tools to stay present in their body and to get in touch with the subconscious and what is going on and how to manage it, how to move away from it or to release it. So all of those are good tools that everybody should have access to. And I've used that work in recovery, and mothers can take it and teach their children. And so it's universal. It's both adults and children can use it. So there's all kinds of ways. I think there's all kinds of practices that we can use, but definitely to begin the healing process to help ourselves, right? We don't want to get sick with it. We don't want to bury it. We have to pay attention to it. So I'm glad that we have these resources here at the clinic and in the community.
Can I just add something?
Yes.
Thanks, Donna. I really appreciate that. I think about my parents and with historical trauma. They both went to boarding school, and neither of them were taught how to process their emotions, and especially they were taught that their emotions were bad. So my dad was punished for being depressed, angry, happy, everything. So I think that this interruption that we've experienced because of historical trauma, our kids really need to know that it's okay to be angry, it's okay to be afraid, but don't hang on to that, right? We need to learn, we need to teach them, and maybe even learn for ourselves how to let go of these emotions. Suffering, yes, is needed for spiritual and personal growth, but we're not meant to suffer needlessly. So I just wanted to say that I think about our ancestors and our elders that went through boarding schools, and the trauma there, and that gets passed down. So I just wanted to add that. So
Miigwech, Donna, and Renee. That is great. And it just reminds me of kind of a simple technique too that I have used in the past and that I encourage clients to use that I think is really helpful. And it comes out of like meditation. And I know a lot of people hate meditation because I think now is a good time to learn it though, as far as like the difficulties that we're isolated more than usual and distant from our friends and family. So I find that like rather than trying to clear my mind, having more of like a non-judgmental attitude and thinking towards like whatever thoughts and feelings are coming up, just accepting them and even labeling them and kind of thinking through. So for example, if you're feeling like, oh gosh, I should have been doing more, I should have done this or that, just being able to say things to yourself that are helpful. So really thinking about it in the context of, what can I do to be loving and helpful to myself? And self-judgment is we can learn from the things we do as mistakes or things that we wish we would have done differently, but really forgiving ourselves that we all make mistakes or there was reason that you couldn't do what you wanted to do, and really that giving that forgiveness and letting go of that judgment is huge during this time, because I think we have so many unrealistic expectations of ourselves and where we should be. And I think one of the big things that I've noticed is just like the level of productivity that we typically do, and how our minds have a little bit more fog right now. We have more going on. It's harder to work at the same capacity that you're used to, and that's okay. And really forgiving yourself for that, or like allowing yourself to have that without judgment, I think is really good. And I like to say, say those things to myself in a peaceful setting where I can decompress, do that breathing, do the body relaxation. One of the things, I've had a neck injury in the past, so one of the things I like to do, I hold a lot of tension in my neck and back. So just tightening your muscles and holding it for 10 to 20 seconds and then releasing it really helps to reduce a lot of the stress that you're carrying in your body. If you're someone who experiences a lot of your stress in your body, which I think we all do to some extent. Any thoughts? Any other thoughts?
I would just add to what you said, you know, we go to our sweat lodge, you know, and we're with nature, going for nature walks. Anything that we do in meditation, because it comes in so many different forms, imagery, drawings, journaling, autogenics, like you just shared with us, Laurel. I would say drumming and that forgiveness exercise, definitely, you know, we can just mirror everything that we learn from our training and put it to use. That's the hardest thing, is step across that, you know, go open the door and go for a walk, and shaking it off. You know, dancing is so important to our community. But right now, I think a lot of us are so sedentary right now. We inhibit ourselves. So we have to break free, you know. And when I thought about this rioting, you know, it's like a lightning bolt came and hit the city, and all of these things surfaced, all of the ill wills and trauma of the people. So now we're looking back and healing. So it would be important that we come together and maybe even offer, you know, a community, if we can. I don't know how to do it, but a mind and body or program or whatever we can offer to support for ourselves and for the community. It's all good.
Miigwech. So important. Any other thoughts? I would say for me, prayer has really been significant, especially for things that, I mean, well, I was going to say things that are out of our control, but everything is out of our control. We can only handle so much, or we can only are in control of so much, I should say. But to really recognize that and acknowledge that, and pray for peace, and pray for the people around us who are hurting, and sending them good thoughts, and that's really been helpful for me. I don't know if others have that practice.
Yes, every day. That's what I depend on.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're coming up on the end of our time together, but we do have a few more minutes here if people want to share other ideas or ways that they're taking care of themselves right now, or helping clients take care of themselves. Okay. Well, I think we're done then. But I really appreciate all the ideas that came out of this too. I love the idea of having a mind-body medicine program of some kind that's for the broader community. So if people have ideas about how to make that happen, please send those, because it's an amazing idea, and I just tangible wise, I can't think about what that would look like. So if anyone else has some creativity, extra creativity, let me know. But thank you so much. I know you guys are doing such amazing work, and that this is a really hard time, and it's so meaningful to the community and to everybody around us. So miigwech, and I hope that you guys all are taking care of yourself and rest up, and hopefully we'll be back together soon, and in our regular spaces. So thank you.
Pretty much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Myra.
Thank you.
Thank you.